Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on supporting youth in the foster care system. My name is Jessica and I'm a YTech team member. Before we begin, let's go over a few things. On the top right-hand corner, you're able to download our PowerPoint presentation and edit at any time during the webinar. Below that is the evaluation link. We'd greatly appreciate if you can take about 5 minutes to complete this after the survey. Please help us ensure that we're providing high-quality training and technical assistance by completing this short evaluation. In the Q&A box, please feel free to ask your questions to our presenters. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you are able to participate in conversation with everyone else. I really hope you enjoy this webinar. Wendy?
Hi everybody, my name is Wendy Quarles and I'm the director of the YTech project and I welcome you today. I'm watching our participant sign-in box and I see that we're still waiting for a number of people to join us, so I'll do a little bit of the introduction work now, but we may have additional people join us as the time rolls through. I welcome our colleagues from across the country to participate in the third of our four-part webinar series in supporting and serving youth. I'll tell you about the YTech in a few minutes, but we value that you take time out of your busy schedule to join us for the webinars. And let me talk to you a little bit about how the YTech fits into a bigger picture of technical assistance centers. So we are part of a group of technical assistance centers providing training and technical assistance across the country for issues and topics related to supporting and serving youth. We work in partnership with the YTech, which is up in the left-hand corner, which provides support to the vocational rehab systems in the areas of pre-ETS, supported employment, customized employment, research being done in the field, and paying attention to quality outcomes for the VR system. We also work in partnership with the NTAC, which is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. NTAC spends their time providing technical assistance at the school level system. So as we continue to have conversations on topics that are near and dear to good work with youth, the YTech and the NTAC together impacts the cross-systems aspect of working with youth. The Promise TA Center that many of you may be aware of works within the Social Security arena and helping youth navigate some of the financial systems. The YTech down in the left-hand corner I'll talk to you about in just a minute, and we also partner with NCWD, the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability. At the end of our webinar today, you'll see that they have some fantastic resources that we'll highlight and talk to you about when we wrap up today. So we're delighted to be one of many technical assistance centers across the country that do this work. The YTech, I'll tell you about the YTech first and then tell you about IEL. We are housed at the Institute for Educational Leadership, and we are in our fourth year of a 5-year cycle. We're funded by the U.S. Department of Education Rehab Services Administration, RSA, and we're charged with providing state VR agencies and related rehabilitation and youth services professionals with technical assistance to help more effectively serve students and youth with disabilities, including disconnected youth who need to re-engage with either education or work. Specifically looking at youth in the juvenile justice system, the foster care system, and other traditionally underserved or isolated youth population. So this webinar today is perfect and in line with the work that we're doing at IEL and at the YTech project. A little bit about IEL. IEL is an organization that's located in Washington, D.C., but has a national reach in our pillars of equipping leaders to better prepare children and youth for college, careers, and citizenship. So you'll see on this slide that we are looking at connecting the community with public education to support the learning and development of young people, to build more effective pathways into the workforce, and also to prepare generations of leaders, both youth with voice and young professionals that are looking to work in our field. So we're excited at both the YTech and IEL to have such a cross-systems approach towards talking about the topics that we'll be addressing today. So one of the things that you can help us out with is participating in our evaluation. So any of you that receive public funding know that we want to take a look at the work that we're delivering and make sure that it's relevant to the work that you're doing. So at the end of our webinar, we'll be providing you with a link that will allow you to give us feedback. Mostly we're looking for how you'll use the skills that we talked about in today's webinar, as well as are there additional professional development opportunities that you can take advantage of, or that we can provide to you that you can take advantage of. So you'll have a 4-part questionnaire. It's very simple, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that. So I wanted to quickly talk about the purpose, process, and payoff for today's webinar. You have the 3 objectives here, and whenever we pull together a webinar, we kind of outline what we hope that you'll learn. So we hope that you'll learn about youth in the foster care system and transition planning considerations. That's a very broad objective for learning, but I'm looking forward to both Krista and JC, our presenters today, bringing us examples of some best practices that they've learned in the work that they're doing, so that you can think about the work that you're doing. We'll be dipping into all of these topics as a webinar does in a limited amount of time, and our hope is that we initiate thinking and we validate some of the work that you're doing. We hope that one of the slides or 15 of the slides jump into your mind and say, you know, I haven't heard that term, or that's a great idea, I'd like to duplicate that. So both Krista and JC have provided their information at the end of the webinar if you want to reach out with them directly, or if you want more of this information to let us know. I have also a reason that I like to be on board as the director of the YTech project is because I also would like to hear from you in either the chat or the question and answer box or by way of your evaluations if you are also doing fantastic work in this space. If you are providing great work and want to share some of the work that you're doing in working with youth who are in the foster care system, let us know, because it's our job to spread the good word of good work that's being done. So specifically, let me take it back to our webinar today, that by the end of the webinar, we hope that you'll be able to understand and apply basic techniques of person-centered planning and trauma-informed services and care to work that you're doing with kids who are in the foster care system, with youth that are in the foster care system. And then the last thing that we'll also do is expose you to resources that we have found that we love and share them with you, and again, seek and give you additional resources that you can use in the work. So I will take just one more minute to talk, and I want to introduce you to our 2 speakers. Today you'll first hear from Krista Esquivel. Krista works for the YMCA of San Diego County in the Community Support Services, and she has developed evidence-informed programs and interventions for youth based on experience that she's gained over 18 years supporting and serving youth who are in the foster care system and the homelessness system. She has spent much of her career in residential and community-based settings assisting youth in their quest for strong emotional and social well-being. She's dedicated to knowledge sharing for the purposes of enriching the youth-serving workforce and enhancing program design. She has a master's in social work, as you see from her credentials on the screen. We think Krista is a great match for talking to us about some of the work that her project at the YMCA is doing, and I look forward to having her talk about that. And then we bring to you also JC Farkas. She works at the Sonoran University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, otherwise known as the UCED. at the University of Arizona. She joined the team in 2007, and she's currently the center's director of training. She directs the Person-Centered Initiative, which has included leading a project empowering and completing person-centered plans for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities in foster care as they transition to adulthood. I love both of the backgrounds that our presenters bring to the topic today. Looking forward to hearing about some of the excellent work that they've done and hoping that as you listen to them, you can tie it into the work that you're doing. I'll be paying attention to the chat room, and I will bring them questions if they don't see them, and I'm going to toss it over to Krista.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy. Well, hello, everybody. So happy to be here. Again, my name is Krista. I work for the YMCA of San Diego County. And what we'll do today is talk a little bit about a couple of unique projects that we have that hopefully are relevant to you and your work. And then I'll focus a bit on a couple of approaches that we have developed or adapted when working with youth in foster care or youth formerly in foster care that we think can increase their engagement in services as well as offer feelings of safety and security no matter what the intervention is that you or the service area that you might be working in. So briefly, I will chat a little bit about our Y here in San Diego. I know we have folks from across the country, and the Y is also across the country. So you might be thinking, does my local Y do stuff like this? And the answer is probably not. We are a pretty unique part of the YMCA here in San Diego County. There are only a few other community support service type branches across the nation. Here at Youth and Family Services or Community Support Services, we offer transitional housing, behavioral and mental health, family preservation work, and we have an extreme focus on youth who are in foster care as well as young people who are homeless or disconnected. We work very closely with our county child welfare agencies, our state-level agencies that serve these populations, as well as the federal-level agencies that work with both runaway and homeless youth and youth in foster care. So while we are connected to traditional recreational branches, I always like to say we're the same and they're our sisters. However, we don't have a gym or a pool. So I will just put us forward here to talk a little bit about an example of some of the work that we do here in San Diego. California is a county-administered state, so that means the child welfare or state-level and federal-level programs that come down to states or counties, our counties here administer those with little kind of interference at the state level. So here in San Diego, because we are such a large county, our county contracts out child welfare services to community-based organizations to serve all young people, including those that are formerly in foster care. Here in California, we have extended foster care to age 21, so young people can stay in the foster care system until then, and those young people are actually called non-minor dependents. So a great example of some of the benefits of contracting with community-based organizations is a joint procurement process that occurs with our county-level child welfare services and our Workforce and Innovation Opportunity Act. And that is similar to a local WIB. We have the San Diego Workforce Partnership. And they and the county child welfare services have a policy alignment between their systems. And so what they did was they got together and they created a joint procurement process. And this is a collaboration between our independent living skills programs. Folks in other states may know it as ILP, independent living programs, and our WIOA youth programs. And so the goal is really to combine this funding to better serve youth who are in foster care while also reducing duplication of services with a focus on, of course, the workforce services, subsidized internships, work readiness classes, all that great stuff, and that's really coupled with this ILP. So here in San Diego, if you are a contracted provider for independent living program services, you are also a contracted WIOA provider as well. And so that's just something that's really unique, a great example of how a systems level policy change can unite these two worlds and reduce that duplication, better serve this particular population. Another really great project that we have is actually a demonstration project that we recently completed. It was funded by the Administration for Children and Families and the Children's Bureau, which is the federal body in charge of youth in foster care across the country. The Connections Project is the name of that project, and we used an intervention that was aimed at increasing self-regulation and relational wellness. We found an increase in emotion regulation, social conduct, and impulse control. We also found an increase in income, employment status, and educational status after 1 year in the program. About 25% of the young people who were in our program had a documented mental health diagnosis. And, you know, this research that we've done is important to us, and we've incorporated the intervention into our work across our department, and specifically into our work readiness and economic stability and mobility services for youth who are both associated with WIOA or another program out of the Office of Family Assistance that also focuses on economic stability and mobility. And it makes sense because the current research in the field tells us that increased social networks can lead to happier, healthier lifestyles and an increase in socioeconomic status. So for us to focus on relational wellness through the development of self-regulation skills kind of provides a new lens for practitioners in this space. So we moved from an extreme focus on hard skills like resume building or do I know how to take the bus, to a focus on soft skills. And to us, self-regulation encompasses those soft skills. We want our participants to make changes to their behavior, make appropriate decisions, manage their emotions. And what we found is that positive relationships with others help decrease stress and manage the toxic stress response, which leaves more room for adaptive, healthy behavior, thinking, and emotions in its place. And all of these things are really essential in the world of work. Further evidence suggests that curriculums and interventions that are rooted in brain science and self-regulation will assist youth, particularly those who have experienced trauma and systems, to better manage the navigation of complex systems such as higher education and employment. Our particular intervention that we adapted was dialectical behavior therapy, sort of less important at this point, and more important that we centered our work on the development of self-regulation for the purposes of increasing social networks and relational competencies. So a little bit about why we went this way. Relationships are healing. We know this. Science tells us this. Our brains are wired to be social. Adults with robust support systems are happier, they're healthier, and they have increased socioeconomic status. We want our participants to have the same thing. Again, we want them to make changes to their behavior, engage in less high-risk activity, make appropriate decisions, and manage their emotions. Positive relationships with others help to decrease stress and manage a toxic stress response, something that is really heightened in young people who have experienced trauma, specifically those young people who are in foster care or were formerly in care. And these changes that we want occur in the brain, and relationships serve as a primer to experience the change necessary for the neuroplasticity to occur to help the brain make those important changes. Specifically, The reason we focus on adolescents, so young people who are about 16 to 25 years old, is because it's the second most profound period of brain development in the lifespan, and it's second only to those in the 0 to 5 years. This is an optimal time to take advantage of the plasticity and the changes that are occurring naturally in the brain, making it more likely that new and healthy behaviors will become part of the changing landscape of the brain. We can facilitate brain growth, though, through our responsiveness. So a lack of or punitive approach will actually frustrate this process. And again, young people who have experienced trauma, separation, and grief are especially affected by the presence of positive relationships and connections. A little bit more about how chronic stress and the toxic stress response is very likely to exist among this particular population of young people. We know that stress is helpful, and it can aid in decision-making in certain situations. Like if we're walking in the woods and we see a bear, our stress response will kick on and tell us to fight, flight, or freeze, right? I actually don't exactly know what to do if there's a bear, so that's a bad analogy. I think running is not the thing to do. Maybe someone can put that in the chat. But when chronic stress is present, positive coping and problem solving does not develop appropriately. And so for young people who have experienced extreme poverty, chronic instability, unmet needs, constant unmet needs, they have enhanced stress responses, and self-regulation skills are needed. But those self-regulation skills can't develop under these specific conditions. So their brains become primed to overreact to normal stressors, and cognitive energy quickly depleted. It makes it difficult to persist at task-oriented actions, manage their emotions and impulses, and organize thinking and behavior. This chronic stress and the toxic stress response affects how their brains process and handle information. So a little bit more about self-regulation. It can be defined as the act of managing thoughts and feelings in order to engage in goal-directed action. And so for us here at the Y, increased self-regulation has really become a core goal in our work across all of our programs, especially those that serve youth in care or youth who are formerly in care. Self-regulation is the foundation for lifelong functioning. It helps us to regulate our thinking, our behavior, and our emotions. We wake up every day and use self-regulation no matter what we're doing. It allows us to integrate our past experiences and complex information for processing, such as following social norms and responding effectively to social cues, managing emotional arousal, effortful control and attention, goal setting and planning, perspective taking, persistence, self-soothing, relaxation, empathy, and compassion. It's a dynamic yet responsive set of very complex cognitive, emotional, and behavioral processes that serve as a foundation for functioning and functioning well in our society. So, part of developing appropriate and optimal self-regulation skills includes co-regulation. And co-regulation is actually an opportunity for us as service providers and professionals that come into contact with these young people to help them better develop and utilize their self-regulation skills, no matter why you're coming into contact with them or how you're coming into contact with them. So co-regulation is needed to self-regulate. Co-regulation is an interactional process between a youth or a young person and a caregiver or even a worker that is warm and responsive. And so a warm and responsive interaction helps to make a young person feel safe and secure, and it reduces demand on already overloaded cognitive and emotional centers that are maybe overloaded by chronic stress. Responsive relationships with adults aid in the development of self-regulation skills. So if we think about the newborn analogy, when you have a newborn child, it's crying, 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 crying. You don't know why it's crying. you go over to it, you soothe it immediately, oh, everything's going to be fine, and then you frantically try to figure out if it needs food, a change, or sleep, right? That is co-regulation, that part of the caregiver going and soothing that child before we even know what it is that they need. And the growth-promoting relationship needs co-regulation at its core. The more that our young people in care can engage in trusting, co-regulating relationships, the more opportunity they have to practice those important self-regulation skills, and the more likely they are to use those skills in the face of adversity and stress. The main goal here is to reduce the stress that a participant is feeling. If that can occur through a responsive relationship with an adult, the more likely they are to call on you in times of stress and to actually remember the things that you might have been working with them on. There's three very important parts to co-regulation: coaching and teaching, and those are opportunities to practice skills. That is us modeling, and it's also a tiered approach to utilizing those skills in increasingly stressful and difficult situations. Relationships are the second part. Warm and responsive relationships with adults are the cornerstone of co-regulation. Youth have to feel free of judgment, they have to feel safe, respected, and they should be met with compassion when they make mistakes and navigate through difficult decisions. And third, environment. Their environment is extremely important. Their basic needs have to be met. Young people can't attempt to acquire or increase regulatory functioning if they're dealing with a basic need deficiency or some kind of instability or chaotic environmental stressor. So if you have a young person who's coming to you and they're sleeping on the streets, that basic need, that safety, physiological safety, has to be met before a young person can start to make real change, real progress on the self-regulation piece. And then, of course, the protection and buffering from those environmental stresses is important when we're increasing these skills. So we have a polling question here. Jessica, I think you're going to move it over for folks. And so at this point, wondering if, you might know how to be a co-regulator. Yeah, I got it. No, I need more information. Oh, that's good. A lot of people got it. We'll wait a second for folks to hop in here. You can see it's changing a little bit. Okay. So great. That's awesome. I'm so excited that so many people got it. They know how to co-regulate. But for those of us who need more information, or those of us who want to kind of think through this, we have developed an approach, and it's a relationally focused framework for connecting, and it's called CAVE. And we developed this approach in our research project because what we found was no matter what intervention it was we were trying to have young people engage with us in, it mattered who was delivering the service. And in a larger conversation with some folks at the national level, we had some dialogue about this, and it's really hard for us to kind of qualify the qualities that the right person has who works with this particular population. And so we tried to do that here with CAVE. So knowing that this population needs access to caring support systems that can offer warm and responsive relationships, that's that co-regulation piece. We developed this approach to help staff and others that work with this population to better understand the qualities that are critical if we want to develop an authentic connection. And so the CAVE stands for Compassion, Awareness, Validation, and Empowerment. Someone who works with this group has to come to them with compassion. And the way that we define compassion here is empathy with the desire to help. Empathy alone leaves us burnt out. And we know that that's a problem in the social work space. The best social workers don't stay because they're filled with empathy potentially, and it really burns us out. So compassion takes that empathy and it wraps it into a desire to help. And it gives you a way that you can help. And protects you from burnout. Compassion combats shame. And when we're working with this population, particularly foster youth and youth who are formerly in care, shame is a really big piece of their identity. And we have to meet them where they are and combat that shame. It'll allow for client vulnerability, and it really conveys a willingness on our part to connect with them at a very human level. The A is awareness, and this awareness piece, I think, is one of the most important parts of the CAVE approach. It is judgment-free, and it's us listening to young people without our own values interfering. We have to know that young people are coming to us with their own experiences, and some of the ways in which we guide them or advise them are really tainted with our own lens, our own values that kind of come through. And that can be a disservice to this group. We have to know that the values, the choices, the actions that we give to this group are not one size fits all. Every young person that comes to us is an individual, and we need to be very aware that we're going to treat them and should treat them as the individuals that they are. This awareness of yourself and the way that your own personal lens affects your relationships will increase the odds of client engagement. Validation is the V, and that is really recognizing another person's internal experience. Validating the way somebody feels, even if we don't agree, even if we think, oh, that's not that big of a deal, we have to validate how they feel. It shows acceptance of their experience, it does not dismiss it, and it increases trust. But you have to know, too, that when we validate a young person's experiences or the way that they feel about a particular scenario, it doesn't condone their actions. So I know that that sometimes gets difficult for people. And just because we validate how somebody feels, it doesn't mean we're condoning maybe a bad choice or a risky behavior that they engaged in. Being able to validate will help you to better recognize what motivates a young person, which in turn could help you in whatever service provision you might be engaged in with them. The E in CAVE is for empowerment, and the way that we define this here for CAVE is a little different than your traditional empowerment. This is the presentation of the range of possibilities and choices that a young person might have. The reason this is difficult for folks is because we have to accept that the choices that they actually have access to may not always be good. They may not always be the ones that we want them to make, but it conveys a level of respect and trust to that client that we see that they have access to a full range of choices, that it is not black and white, that there is a lot of gray, and choices are very, very, very important for young people who have been in care. The ability to make choices, even if they're not the greatest ones, is extremely important to them. And again, your recognition that they have access to all of the choices, that you see what they are, and that you're willing to identify them, it will increase trust. And again, that warm and responsive relationship. So lastly, this is one very brief example of how we integrate the self-regulation piece into traditional work readiness curriculum. So this is just a little snippet from one of our programs that deals with economic stability and mobility. So in addition to one-on-one coaching, the use of career assessment tools and peer-to-peer work, our work readiness classes are rooted in the brain science and self-regulation skill development themes. The topics include Jobs 101, the mindful employee, resume building, of course, preparing for an interview, diversity and non-judgment, and thoughtful decision making. And so in addition to working with a CAVE-informed staff member, young people who participate in groups like this find the approach to be novel, as it gives them access to dialogue with their peers that they haven't always had the opportunity to explore in the past, It helps to normalize their experience and find ways to approach the world of work specifically with a different set of skills and tools to better navigate how complex that world of work is. So that is about it for me. I want to stop here before I hand it over to JC and see if anyone had particular questions or thoughts or comments.
Krista, this is Wendy. While we have people thinking about what questions they may have, you may notice on the participant list that we have quite a few people that work in the role of being a vocational rehabilitation counselor or a counselor that works with individuals who are blind and visually impaired. In the absence of having a fantastic program like the one that you've described, do you have any key suggestions on any one of these ideas that you've talked about that is maybe the most important or one of the most important, and something that a voc rehab counselor or even a vocational rehab system could think about putting in place when either initiating services for youth who are in the foster care system or making their services even better?
Sure, I realize this
that's
is
a big, long question.
Yeah, no, I got your question out of that, and I realize this is a lot of information. I would say the most important piece of anything that you've seen today is a warm and responsive relationship. So young people who have systems involvement, and this really takes trauma-informed care to the next level. So I know folks are probably very familiar with trauma-informed care, and that's the idea that we realize that folks coming to us have trauma, and the way that we talk to them and the way that we serve them has to look different than kind of our traditional customer service techniques. A warm and responsive relationship that any person can have with another human being, that's going to make the biggest difference to this particular population.
And we're also in the business of working with state VR systems and their partner at taking a look at peer mentoring models. Do you have any experience or recommendations on how to continue that warm and responsive relationship when it comes to the possibility of initiating a peer approach?
Sure. In our Connections project, we hired young people with shared life experience, and we trained them in adapted dialectical behavior therapy and the CAVE approach. So, and those particular staff members are the most important part of the work that we do. So across all of our programs, and I'm talking maybe 19 different programs we have for young people in the system, we have what we call support specialists in every single one. So identifying someone with shared life experience who really understands and has been through what these young people have been through, training them, treating them like an employee, paying them for their time, and giving them professional development opportunities has really been the way that that peer piece works the best for us.
I love hearing you give that example, because what that just did for me as I was thinking about you describing that example is gives a work opportunity for a peer. So it seems like a very braided approach towards enhancing the peer specialist's role at their own success while supporting someone who may be initiating the employment process. So I love that from a model of how to do our work differently. So if there's folks that represent the provider system on the phone, I love that idea. Are we able to steal, for lack of a better word, the CAVE model? Is that a trademarked approach, or what is your dissemination allowance for that?
Yeah,
how can we use
we have a brief that we created, and it was created using federal funds, so it is public information. We have a brief, and we have a training. You know, it's a probably 6-hour training that we provide. And if folks are really interested in it, we have folks who can actually come out to you for a really minimal cost, paying, some travel fees, and we can train you and your teams. Or you can come to sunny San Diego and get a little vacation out of it, and we can train you here for free.
Actually, if anybody's listening in and the idea of receiving that training is piquing your interest, let the YTech know, because I think we could work in partnership with the folks at the YMCA to bring that training beyond the taste, like I said, the dipping into the subject that Krista was able to do with us. If this concept is interesting to you, or if you feel that some of the things that Krista referred to is something that you may be missing or that you want to enhance in your workplace, let's see if we can build that connection and bring even more of this information. When I saw the poll land where it landed, I think we all do co-regulation, but I had never thought about it from the scientific side of things that you talked about. And I very much, Krista, appreciate you calling attention to the brain science aspect of this. As we in the field are serving more and more youth, we are experiencing a greater knowledge that we need to put in our own repertoire of skills, and the brain sciences is a lot of talk on the in the field right now. So I said I wouldn't talk that much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make some connections into the audience. And I was wondering if anybody has questions. I'm looking for questions in the Q&A box or any comments on Krista's side of the presentation.
Well, if anything comes up, I'll be here throughout the rest of the presentation, and we'll be listening to JC's work, so there'll be another opportunity to ask questions, or if you want to just put them in the Q&A, we can do that too. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome. Fantastic. We'll toss it over to JC.
Hi, thank you, Krista. I'm a fan of the CAVE approach and want to learn even more about it, and I think it really does align well with person-centered approaches and person-centered planning, which is what I'll be talking about today. So first, a little bit about the Sonoran YouSed. For those of you who might have not heard of a YouSed before, we are one of 67 centers across the U.S. States and territories. There's at least one in each of those. We're funded by the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and we have our mandates through the Developmental Disabilities Act. And so USEs are meant to be a bridge between academia and the community. And at the Sonoran YouSed at the University of Arizona, we're housed in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, and we really strive to expand possibilities and enhance independence for people with developmental and other disabilities through partnerships to educate and train future disability professionals, create new knowledge through disability-related research, engage the community through education and innovative programs and practices, disseminate information on policy and practice in the field of disability. One of our major areas of focus is youth to adult transition, particularly in the areas of employment, health, and transition planning. And as Wendy mentioned earlier, I've been directing our person-centered initiative since probably 2008, and I've been leading different programs conducting person-centered planning with transition planning as for youth with primarily developmental disabilities. And so person-centered planning, it's been around since the late 70s and early 80s, and recently folks probably have heard with the CMS rules, the Centers for Medicaid, the new rules, and for home and community-based services. And one of that is that all service planning for those who are enrolled in those services must be person-centered. It's also a recommended practice in WIOA. So I'd love to hear from folks, thank you Jessica for putting up the poll, on how familiar you are with person-centered planning. give a little time for folks to, numbers are still going up, okay.
I love watching the magic of the polls at work.
Right. I'm glad to see that there's a decent number of people who have actually received training. I'm heartened to see that. Okay, thank you. So it looks like, there's some familiarity with it, and a few people have actually participated in plans, which is great. But for those of us who may not be as familiar with it, I'm just going to give a brief overview about person-centered planning and kind of the philosophy and principles behind that. So how we've there are plenty of people who've been doing amazing work since the 80s. Michael Small, John and Connie O'Brien, Jack Spearpoint and Beth Mount. Some of the big names who have really pushed this forward. And there's different types of planning, but kind of at the heart of all of it and the philosophy that underlies person-centered practices and planning is the notions that all people have the basic human right and responsibility to exercise freedom of choice in their own lives, that people do need to be knowledgeable about the full range of choices available to them and have the skills and supports to exercise those choices, that regardless of the barriers they face, that they have the opportunity to find success and independence through engaging in community life and employment. The idea that they have the right to try, whether they fail or succeed, and try again. And that's really, we're talking about dignity of risk. And that, all of us learn from our mistakes, right? And so having the opportunity to try something, realize this is not for me, and do it again, or find something new is so important. I think in the world of employment, what we find sometimes with especially individuals with more maybe significant needs in terms of disability, that we expect, okay, we have a job opportunity, here it is, and it doesn't work out, oh, someone may not be employable. Or it didn't work, so we, that this person may not be able to work. And we've seen that a lot, unfortunately, with youth. And part of that is that we also haven't been having the conversations about how, of what they want to be, even from an early age. And so when we get to that transition age, and we're now talking about employment and whether or not there's been much exploration, how we can expect folks to be know exactly what they want to do. Most of us didn't know what we wanted to do in high school. I would be surprised with the folks on the webinar today of what you thought you wanted to do in high school is what you're doing now. So that's an important concept. And a lot of this has to do with self-determination and self-advocacy. And so really what we're trying to do is for people to have better lives and not just better plans. It's about the process and not the paper and the plans themselves. So person-centered planning, it's an individualized approach that helps a person discover what they really want. The goal is to promote the best interests of individuals who have disabilities by changing the way we think about disability. Through this planning, we're helping them to identify goals for living in the most inclusive community settings, being able to access a personalized mix of formal and informal services and supports to achieve those goals. We're trying to capture a full picture of who the person is and what they really want to do with their life. And ideally, you bring together all of the people who are important to the person to achieve the life they desire. Most importantly, it belongs to the individual that the plan is being made for, right? And so we hope that in giving, really the plan is theirs and they have ownership of it, and it's ownership of their wishes and dreams, and by bringing people together to update the plan as the person's interests and goals change and figure out what has and hasn't worked, it's a living document. One more thing I'd like to say on this really is that the focus of our planning, and for those who support them really and care about them, they're the primary authorities on the person's life direction. And so the purpose of person-centered planning really is learning through shared action. And honest person-centered planning comes through respect for the dignity and completeness of the focused person. It calls for a sustained search for ways to deal with difficult barriers and conflicting demands. I mean, at its essence, I mean, this really shouldn't be a disability thing. This is that all of us should be seen as a whole person who has dreams, wishes, preferences, and that regardless of our abilities, that everyone has the opportunities to achieve and reach the goals that they'd like to, with the right supports in place. Sometimes it can be easier to describe by saying what person-centered planning is not. It's not an attempt to fix the person. It's not a behavior plan. It's not a standardized process. It's highly individualized. And we're not dwelling on reputations or labels. And I think particularly with the population we're talking about today, because of some of the trauma that foster youth, current foster youth and former foster youth have experienced, as Krista kind of explained with some of the their behaviors that we see of sometimes, really is their way of coping, and in that kind of survivalist mindset in expressing what's going on with them. What it is a way to organize information in plain language, move towards a desired future, making sure that we're giving respect to choices, regardless if we think if it is a poor choice, that we're promoting valued roles, whether that's as an employee, a worker, a friend, a neighbor, a student. It's capacity focused. We're looking at what people are good at, what they're capable of, and focusing on that and along with things that they see themselves wanting to do. It's about creating an accurate picture of where someone is, and it's action-oriented. So really the purpose, like I said, it's a living document. It should be to plan, do, act on it, and then evaluate and come back to the plan again. It's very useful for life-changing events, and why we promote it and using it particularly for transition planning. And it can be a good community and team-building tool. One of our primary goals, especially with the project I'm sharing today, is trying to have better coordinated services for the youth in question, because they're involved with so many systems, and to also help to build some of that social network and informal supports that foster youth may typically not have. And so we are intentionally moving towards an approach that's not geared towards fixing or solving problems, but focusing on providing opportunities and informing the person and their team of possible options so they can make an informed choice. This could include employment, living arrangements, social networks, and other services and supports. It's about creating avenues for self-actualization and self-expression, and empowering a youth or the person who the plan is being crafted for to be the causal agent in one's life. It promotes personal freedom, it enhances relationships, and helps to build meaningful interdependence. We all seek and rely on support from others, and so how can we help to build some of those mutually beneficial relationships, because we know it is so important and can be healing. And it helps to facilitate community involvement and positive valued roles. Ultimately, person-centered planning adheres to a set of principles that value self-determination and personal dignity. I would say and argue what we heard from Krista, that CAVE is a very person-centered approach, and that engaging in person-centered planning really aligns well with the validation and empowerment concepts, where we are honoring lived experiences, respecting values and preferences, and promoting informed choice, control, and allowing for dignity of risk. So that takes me to this specific project that we've been working on for 5 years, creating a picture of a life for transitioning youth with DD and foster care. This was a project done in partnership with our state's DD agency. And it came about, they contacted us because of the work we've been doing in person-centered planning with transition-age youth. But the background is that for over 20 years, the DD agency, they served as the child welfare entity for youth who are also enrolled in DDD. So they were the legal guardians. They performed all child welfare functions. And so whether or not a youth was eligible for long-term care services with Medicaid, they still provided all the supports and services that was needed. In 2009, the decision was made to all of that to transfer back to what was then Child Protective Services. And so DED no longer had legal responsibility and couldn't provide the same type of supports and services to those who weren't eligible for long-term care services. And so they saw it as there really needed to be a more intensive transition planning for these youth. And I'm sure that, I don't know, we didn't go into this much on this webinar, but research has shown, and that we've seen anecdotally, is that in general foster youth experience poor outcomes, transition outcomes, and research shows that youth with disabilities, they encounter adverse experience and poor outcomes they have a greater risk for encountering adverse experiences while in care and for poor outcomes in areas of maltreatment, more restricted school and home settings, employment, and post-secondary opportunities. And so it was really critical for us to think about how we could work with this population to help improve transition outcomes for youth who may not have as many opportunities compared to the general population. And so we were able to get funding from our state DD Planning Council, and we specifically targeted youth ages 14 to 18 who were enrolled in both the DD system and our child welfare system, with purposefully focusing on youth who were not eligible for long-term care services. Our goals were to develop person-centered plans with these youth built on strengths, dreams, and choices. We wanted to make sure that these youth were knowledgeable about the options that were available to them and try to build on for most of them, they don't have much in terms of informal support. And so focusing on how we could help to build that social network and more caring relationships with adults and others and peers who weren't paid basically to support them, and to provide opportunities for them to gain and practice self-advocacy, self-determination, and independent living skills. We found that a lot of youth weren't necessarily being referred to the IOP programs, in part because of expectations of their capabilities to be able to participate. And then, there's questions around how accessible some of those programs are. And so we kind of took a different route in working with the independent living centers through kind of more of the disability side and network in providing opportunities for youth to learn these skills. Ultimately, we were trying to improve services for this population, particularly by in helping to empower them to make meaningful and informed choices about their future. And so our major activities, we completed person-centered plans with the youth. We supported the youth through these workshops. We trained both facilitators to conduct the plans with the youth, as well as professionals and others in the community on person-centered practices. We engaged in project evaluation and convened a statewide work group on person-centered planning and transition, and I'll be talking about all of these things. I think one aspect is really important is for us to talk about the collaborators, because one of our goals really was to have more coordinated efforts in utilizing person-centered planning with these youth. And so we worked really closely with the statewide independent living coordinator for the Department of Child Safety, which is our child welfare agency in Arizona. And we also worked with VR. And so at the same time this project got started, VR and DDD, they entered into a memorandum of understanding so that it dedicated 2 VR counselors to work exclusively with youth who were enrolled in both DDD and DCS starting at age 14, as well as anyone who, as long as they had been enrolled in both of those at transition age and were formerly with DCS, after aging out, they could also be eligible to work with these VR counselors. And so we ensured that the youth in our program, if they weren't already enrolled with VR, we invited these counselors and to the planning meetings and to help foster their participation in VR, and to get some of those, especially the exploration services, that they could engage in starting at age 14. Many of our youth were duly diagnosed with a behavioral health condition, and so we tried to involve as much as possible behavioral health and being part of the planning process. And our 2 other major collaborators, I mentioned the independent living centers, our 2 largest in the state. We partnered with them to create summer workshop programs for foster youth with disabilities, so that the opportunity to work on self-advocacy and self-determination skills, as well as independent living skills. And then we also work with our Title V agency, so the Office of Children with Special Healthcare Needs. They've put together this great healthcare organizer as a way for youth to at least have at their fingertips, even if they may not fully understand all aspects of their health, but they know how to access it and know where it is. And so we trained our facilitators as well as the Independent Living Center staff, so that all youth who we encountered in our project received a healthcare organizer and be able to use that to advocate for their own health care and services. And so with the project, we engaged over 60 youth, and we completed 22 person-centered plans with youth. Overall, it was a somewhat diverse group that we worked with. The majority of them were male. We had one youth who, during their participation, came out as transgender. And we had a decent representation of racial and ethnic minorities. And in terms of disability, the majority of the youth participating, because of the eligibility, had an intellectual disability. Almost 3/4 of them had multiple disability diagnoses, and over 60% was dually diagnosed with a behavioral health condition. And I will mention that we experienced significant barriers in recruitment and retention of youth in the project. There was a lot of youth who did end up moving around a bit, more restricted facilities and moving out of state. So we had some barriers in that respect, and that it was a challenge to actually have direct access to some of the youth. So quickly, just back to our Picture Your Life Academy. This was our summer workshop series where youth spent twice a week for an hour and a half over 8 weeks, covering a variety of topics. And really, we were promoting informed decision-making and community involvement through a curriculum inclusive of independent living skills with self-advocacy and self-determination woven throughout all of the topics. And so all of the youth who participated in this also received one of the healthcare organizers. And this was open to not only the participants in our specific program who were getting person-centered plans, but also we opened it up more broadly for just foster youth with disabilities in general. Some of the things that the youth, which I think were important to share, was that that I think speaks again to the importance of relationships, is that a lot of the youth, they got to meet new people and make new friends. And I think that having other youth who might be in similar situations to be able to talk about some of the topics that we had, and just to be able to have that peer connection was important. The majority of the youth in our project were actually living in group homes rather than with foster families. Very few actually did. And so I think it was really important to have this other connection with peers. We had youth who were part of Disability Incorporated, which is, they lead the Arizona Youth Leadership Forum, and they participated, and we had former foster youth who were among the panel who would come throughout the series to help lead a lot of those workshops. So there was also a little bit of that mentorship as well. But most important, what I love this last quote is that one of the youth said that not only were they helpful, but they taught me how I have my own voice and should speak up. And having that opportunity to say, to really advocate for themselves, which I think how much of that, especially like I said, they're in group homes, I think it was certainly an important aspect for folks having that opportunity. So I just wanted to give a little taste of kind of in a way of person-centered planning. This is a one-page description for Cheyenne. She participated in our project. She was actually from our first cohort. This is one that she created while participating in the Picture Life. She had also another one that served as kind of a cover page and table of contents for a person-centered plan, but this is the one that she was willing to allow us to share. And so this just gives you a little bit of idea of how we're really trying to showcase, more positive aspect and introduction of our youth. And so even with planning, the main thing we always want to do is kind of at the forefront talk about what people are good at, what's going well, what people like and admire about the person, because that really just set a completely different tone compared to the type of planning that youth are used to. And that's something that we saw time and again with our youth participants. We had professionals telling us they won't sit through this planning meeting. They're not going to be able to do this. And when our facilitators met with the youth to begin with, and then when we had our plans, other professionals were surprised by how they were really engaged in one topic, because it is a completely different approach in how you have, you're talking about future and making decisions, that they were really at the forefront and driving that process and being part of that. The one-page description here also, it talks about, what supports our need to stay happy, healthy, and safe, but also what's really important to Cheyenne. So her first thing she talked about is wanting to have a job that she enjoys and that she'd like to go to college. And so just be able to capture some of that information and, but really she drove this and helped creating this. And that's what our whole project is really wanting to empower youth to be able to have a say in what their future looks like. So just briefly, I want to talk about some of the evaluation we did so I can share with you what the youth had to say about the planning process and this project. We did a ton of different aspects of evaluation, but the youth engaged in questionnaires, pre-planning, right after they planned, and for each year that youth wanted to participate in the program, we asked them to complete another questionnaire. We also did interviews with 6 youth. And so some of the, a lot of the evaluation was to try and determine if person-centered planning was making a difference in the youth's quality of life and their transition outcomes. Just a few basics is that when reviewing their plans, we see that at least 45% of them had concrete steps for obtaining permanent living arrangements. As I said, we had youth as young as 14 who were part of that, so that may have not been the main focus or area of what youth were wanting to plan goals around. 81% of the plans had concrete steps for future employment and incorporating job exploration and post-secondary ed opportunities, and that 85% of the youth felt better prepared for life after high school through the planning process and their participation. We found that youth learned more about the things they could do after they finished high school and the places they could work. Again, we were all about wanting to make sure people knew about the options available to them. As I mentioned, they felt that their readiness for life after high school increased after the planning process. One that really stood out to us is that youth felt, at the beginning, youth felt they had little knowledge about skills related to finding work, and they wanted more training in this area. This improved over time, in part because we really tried to infuse more of that into our workshops, as well as with what ensuring that our facilitators were really making sure this was part of the exploration discovery in their planning process. youth felt they could better describe and felt more comfortable talking about their health, and that youth felt that they were making decisions and being able to tell others what they wanted or needed, more so over time. So some of the challenges that we experienced, I will say that when I first started this project, I had very little experience working with foster youth, but had been working with youth with IED for several years, and planning with them. And so some of these things we kind of, with our partnership with our DD agency, their child welfare liaison, and DCS, we really had to, we learned over the process that just the nature of the places, the placements that the youth and their experience were going to be a big part of being able to even approach and be able to plan with the youth. And so many of them had complicated personal histories, all of them experienced trauma, and many of them experienced physical and sexual abuse. And so there were just legal aspects that we also had to be made aware of, but it prompted us to also make sure that all of our facilitators received additional training in trauma-informed care, and the idea of having moving from toxic environments to healing environments. And so we made sure that we provided that additional training for our facilitators for them to be able to better plan with the youth and connect with the youth. There were issues around some of our youth becoming perpetrators or having engaged in some of the activity surrounding reunification with family members who were abusers. And so it became, there was a lot of learning for everyone in our project and for our facilitators to be able to best work with the youth. Again, as I mentioned, that all of our youth were enrolled in multiple service systems, and so trying to be able to bring everyone together and get their participation and buy-in could pose a real challenge over time. And in addition to that, there was a lot of turnover and change in their case managers and support coordinators, which made it difficult to keeping planning consistent, and just with how the youth was feeling about their relationships and the instability that was going on. So having to kind of dance with that and being able to move forward with some of the planning posed a lot of challenges. As I mentioned earlier, just access to youth and communication could be difficult at times. I mean, it was both kind of a blessing and some difficulty by the fact that we were outside of the service systems. I think we garnered more trust with the youth because of it, but at the same time, it posed challenges with sharing of information at times and being kept abreast of what was going on with youth over time. Because a lot of them, transferred to new residential placements, with the turnover of staff and being able to keep in touch with everyone. And this brings to mind one youth in particular who was from our first cohort, who I actually ended up doing his person-centered plan and worked with him over the 5 years. He would inevitably bring up at most of the different meetings, because I would go to his service planning meetings as well, and would when someone else had changed or had moved, who was supporting him, especially someone who he liked, he would get really upset and talk about it, and would end up pointing to me like, she is the one who's like not even providing these direct services, but she's stuck around and been here. Where's everybody else? And so it really just points to how important having some of these relationships are to these youth, who are more than likely having additional trauma in just feeling abandoned multiple times. And so all of that combined, just the time and effort needed to complete the plans, and that this implementation really depended on the team, goes to why we also had such a small number of youth who end up having full completed plans by the end of the 5 years. Let me keep an eye on. Oh, we are running close on time. Okay, I will quickly go through this. So lessons learned. Starting early is so important. For the youth who we got in contact with at age 16 or 17, it was really hard to get them more focused because they just wanted to cut ties with all of the services they had and just wanted to be able to be on their own. And so it was hard to really refocus some of those youth to continue to participate and even think about some of their things in the future. The participation from the different stakeholders and the system and community barriers that were present really speaks to some of kind of the policy changes, even at the local level, that could really be helpful, whether that's in data sharing or joint training and more coordination at higher levels. Would be really important. And a great example of something that seems to be working well is in Minnesota and their Disability Child Welfare Collaborative, where they bring together practitioners and researchers in the areas of child welfare, disability, and education, working together to provide resources, training, and information. And maybe that's something we can share with you all too. But it also speaks to that there needs to be more ongoing support and education for folks in the field who might be working with this population. More education in person-centered practices, trauma-informed care practices, and just what's available out there. And even just some of the laws and opportunities that policies that are out there that people should also be aware of. So this is a limited project, but in thinking about how we could continue to move this forward and make more systematic change, we've put together a work group that really had representatives from all the major players, and we're now in the process of actually transitioning into a community of practice and really ensuring that child welfare is part of this moving forward. Some of the things the work group's done is looked at best practice and gaps in our state and identifying some barriers and challenges and putting together recommendations of how we could move forward in the state. Is where we are right now. Some final thoughts. Many of the youth that we've been working with have endured challenges in their life, but despite all this, they continue to be resilient. And their person-centered plans reinforce and support their goals. And if you take nothing else away from my presentation, I would say that youth really need to be part of and driving their service plans. So whether it's their IEP, their IPE in VR, or their ISP, that they should be present for their meetings and be supported to help lead that, and that they should have a more positive asset-based approach in the way we conduct those service planning meetings, because I've sat in many where it's turned to first what issues and challenges have come up recently, what's gone wrong, versus, which I think honestly has youth check out at that point, because you're just telling what they've done wrong. And so I just really implore you to think about how you even run some of your service planning, and when and how decisions are being made with these youth, that they really are at the forefront and part of that process. And that youth will appear to be more resilient if they have a supportive team, family, or network that are providing appropriate guidance at key transition points in their lives. And so it really, again, speaks to those essential relationships with folks. Would it be best, I mean, I have some stories here of youth in particular, or should we just open it up for questions?
I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions and do wrap up because we want to be careful about valuing people's time on the call. Do you have any last statements that you'd like to make, JC, about the project ultimately?
Well, no, I think that, you know, I feel like we've learned a lot through this project, and we're making efforts now and working with our Title V agency to do a statewide needs assessment on transition for foster youth with disability and special health care needs, so we can really think about how we can best support youth in our state. And so we're working with a lot of partners in being able to do that.
So I would tend to agree, and I want to thank you very much, JC, for this part of the presentation. What I noticed is their comprehensive approach towards pulling in all sorts of folks. I see that you also had Michael Small and Associates, and I think you've taken a real comprehensive look at what it's going to take in terms of skill attainment to support individuals who experience life in the foster care system. I heard from both of you that we talked about these relationships that are essential. I also heard from both of you a demonstration of consistency and investment in the outcomes. I know for those of you who are listening in on the call, you think about our field, and we you know, have some pretty high turnover, particularly in the provider side of things. And, you know, what is it that we can take on as a field to help promote the consistency so that youth who have lived life with people walking out of their lives can live life with us committed to walk into their lives and provide these bridges. I want to just do a few more slides before we wrap up. And we gave a lot of resources. So if you have time, I would encourage you to take a look at resources that both Krista and JC and the YTech have provided. They're amazing examples of systems that have worked together and put out materials for you to put into place in the work that you're doing. So there's a few pages of those. And this is the link for the webinar evaluation. Again, your feedback about the hour and a half that you spent with us is very valuable to us. As this is a commercial for more things that can come in this topic area, please tell us what additional information you would like to put into place in your workplaces to support and serve youth who are in the foster care system. Jessica, are there any other instructions that you have?
At the moment, no.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for spending the afternoon with us. We'll wrap up our evaluation, our webinar now. Join us on October 10th, same place, same time, for supporting and serving youth who are homeless. We look forward to that presentation and learning more about supports and services that we can put together to help all youth be successful. So without further ado, I want to thank Krista and JC for spending time with us as presenters, and have a great day for those of you who joined us on the webinar. Thank you.